Today I want to take just a few minutes and talk about accommodations. In our Catholic schools, when we invite students to join us, and those students have learning disabilities, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate accommodations for them to be successful. Now, when we talk about accommodations, oftentimes people think that means we have to water down the content. The reality is no. The content should remain the same. The difference is in the delivery and the strategies that are used for the student to be able to be as successful as possible. Now, it's almost like a big puzzle, trying to figure out what works. For some students, one strategy will work. For others, that strategy will be a complete failure. So it is a very challenging process for the teacher and the administrators of the schools to ensure that the teachers are given every opportunity to learn about a wide variety of strategies to help our students. One size does not fit all. Now, the main idea is that an instructional accommodation should be seen as a service or support that is provided to a student to help the student fully access the subject material and instructions, as well as to demonstrate their knowledge and mastery of that subject. Again, the accommodations do not change the content of the instruction or the expectations for performance. The teachers need to make sure that they have very clear goals for all of the students who will be in front of them during any given year. Now, one of the ways to increase student access to content standards is through accommodations. Again, without changing the content. Accommodations must be aligned or matched to the classroom instruction, classroom testing. Most accommodations do not begin and end at the school. Oftentimes, students will need more time, for instance, to complete an assignment. That can be done outside of the normal school day. Students need to be able to use the accommodations in the classroom as well as outside. Testing conditions. You need to come up with some strategies for testing students. Again, one size does not fit all. Now, I would strongly encourage any teacher or administrator who is dealing with students with special needs to look at all of the wide variety of assessment accommodations that are out there. Most public school jurisdictions outline them on their websites. I'd encourage you to take a look at those. Now, what are some other accommodations? One is a presentation accommodations. This allows students to access instructional materials in ways that do not require them to visually decode standard print. Students with print disabilities have problems in a normal classroom because they're looking at things in a very different fashion. And teachers need to look at how they're presenting materials. Another accommodation is the response. You need to allow students to record their work in an alternative way, perhaps, to solve or organize their work using some material or device. That might involve technology. It might simply involve asking them to write down or to record their answers. Sometimes the responses need to be given verbally because a student has difficulty writing the answers. Timing and scheduling accommodations. You need to look at changing the allowable time for assignments, projects, tests, and perhaps even how they're organized. Another accommodation is the setting accommodations. Change the location in which instruction is given or the conditions of the classroom. Now, that might mean rearranging the classroom in a particular fashion or having workstations where students can work individually with help from the teacher or a paraprofessional in the classroom. Now again, one of the things that is critical is looking at the content and making sure that the content is covered. Now, we say that we're not going to change the content. That's true. If you're telling students that they need to learn how to write a sentence, that's what they need to do. But perhaps if you're making an accommodation for a student, instead of having them write 15 sentences or 10 sentences, perhaps an accommodation would be to have the students with special needs write only 5, because it will take them much longer to do that than the traditional students. Perhaps giving students a guide, a study guide, that puts the material down in a very sequential fashion. Sometimes students have very difficult times organizing materials because of their disabilities. That's another possible accommodation. Now, when you're considering the selection of any type of accommodations, I would encourage you to look at the following. Number 1, increased access to learning. What can you do to allow a student to learn more? The second thing is the promotion of student independence. How can you develop independence in these students so they're not relying on you as the teacher for clues, answers, or anything else? Use the accommodation across environments and tasks. Don't just simply look at one accommodation and say, well, that's all we do. We just do a testing accommodation, or we just give them more time on a homework or a project. Look at it across environments as well as tasks. That's a critical element. Technology. Take a look at the technology that the school can offer as well as what the student might be able to use at home. Oftentimes, students will have access to the technology, but teachers fail to encourage parents to get the appropriate technology. The ease of setup and use. You have to make sure that you don't spend half of your class just setting up an accommodation. You need to make sure that it's easy to set up and it's also easy for the student to use. Student will become incredibly frustrated and perhaps not use the accommodation to its fullest if they find it frustrating to even begin that assignment. Another important cost that we've talked about throughout the semester is the cost to purchase and maintain the materials that will be used for accommodation. Now, if you need to buy equipment, for instance, if a student has a hearing loss, you need to make sure that you have the amplification technology to assist that student. That costs money. You need to make sure that you budget in the cost for the purchasing and maintaining. So often we forget about the maintenance of our equipment. Now, the tendency may be to recommend the use of a variety of accommodations with the assumption that the more accommodations, the better, or at least something will help. Unfortunately, this kind of hit or miss approach does not need and is not the point of accommodations. As you develop your accommodations for your students, I would strongly encourage you to make sure that you evaluate the effectiveness of those tools by reviewing the hard data that you have. How well is a particular student achieving the goals that have been set? You also need to get input from the parents. What is their perception of the success or failure of the accommodations that you've laid out? Whenever possible, I would encourage you to engage the student in a reflection of what they're doing, what works and what doesn't work, and why not. The other thing that you need to make sure that you do in your evaluation is saying, okay, let's be honest about what works and what doesn't work, and clearly define why something has worked or why it's not working. Because one of the biggest mistakes that we make in education is simply look at one thing that doesn't work and say, let's throw it out, simply because we didn't think it was that successful, but never really understanding why it wasn't successful. So you need to make sure that you understand why a particular accommodation didn't work with a student. Because if you learn that, you'll be able to help other students, as well as that individual student, find new ways to be successful. Now, one of the other things that is becoming more and more common in our schools is the discussion of the universal design for learning. We're learning to think more carefully about the design of our instruction from the beginning to be sure that it can be accessed by today's diverse student population. That's our goal. That's the challenge that you have as an administrator, is to help your teachers learn how to become the most effective teachers that they can possibly be. The ultimate judge of that success is in the performance and the assessment of our students, and whether they have achieved the goals that have been clearly set out. Accommodations should be used to help students. They should not be used as a crutch. Because eventually our students will go out into the real world, and our job is to make sure that they have the skills and the knowledge to be successful in the world in which they will find themselves for years to come. I hope these thoughts help. If you have any questions or thoughts, as always, please feel free to give me a call or email me. I appreciate it and have a good day.